Welcome to See Crime Stories, true stories of the missing and the pursuit of answers. The story of Emily Hart begins far from any mountain pass or alpine lake. It starts on a quiet street in Maple Ridge, Oregon, in a one-story house where postcards from national parks share space on the fridge with grocery lists and overdue library notices. By the mid-1990s, Emily has already become the traveler of Maple Ridge. Neighbors know her as the girl who's always coming back from somewhere, Utah deserts 1 month, coastal trails the next, carrying rolls of film and a notebook full of mileage and trail names. At 27, she's turned those habits into a modest living, a home-built website called Emily on the Road, stitched together on a dial-up connection from the spare room at the back of the Hart house. Inside that room, the walls are lined with paper maps. Oregon, Washington, Montana, each one creased, highlighted, and pinned with colored pushpins. On a bookshelf, plastic binders hold printed emails from other hikers and early readers, along with draft articles she hopes to sell to travel magazines. Hanging on a peg by the door is the one item that appears in nearly all her trip photos, a bright red sleeping bag, rolled tight and cinched with black straps. Her parents, Michael and Linda, are proud. Their only child is doing something they never imagined for themselves. But pride isn't the emotion that drives Michael to keep a yellow legal pad by the kitchen phone. That comes from somewhere else. Somewhere quieter. Years earlier, when Emily first started camping alone, father and daughter made a simple agreement. Every 24 hours, no matter where she was, she would send a short message. Just a few words and a rough location. All good. Near trailhead. Camped by a river. Enough to prove that, somewhere out beyond the edges of their small town, she was still moving, still okay. For every trip, the process looks the same. Before she leaves, Emily lays out her itinerary on the dining room table. Printed routes, motel reservations, flight numbers. Michael listens carefully, asks questions about backup plans and weather, then draws a simple chart on that legal pad: date, time, check-in. Each box is a promise. In late summer 1995, the next set of boxes is labeled Montana. Emily has planned a 10-day solo loop through remote backcountry, more ambitious than most of her earlier trips, but still, on paper, manageable. She's studied the guidebooks, called ranger stations, and spoken with a small local outfitter about trail conditions. At home, she prints out her route and marks it with a thick pen before taping a copy to her bedroom wall and leaving another on her father's desk. We see her pack come together piece by piece. Boots on the mat by the door. A small, early GPS-style device in its case. A folded map sealed in a plastic bag. And finally, the red sleeping bag, strapped across the top of her pack like a banner. The night before she leaves, the family has a quiet dinner at the town's only decent diner. The waitress knows them by name. Emily talks about lakes she wants to photograph and stories she hopes to write. Michael nods along, but his questions are practical. You'll check in at the same time every night? Same as always, she says. I'll have to hike to get a signal, but I'll make it work. Back home, after the dishes are done, Michael sits at the kitchen table with his legal pad. He writes the first line, Day 0, home. All good. Underneath, he marks out the next 10 days and the time, 8 p.m. He doesn't say it out loud, but that time has become the hour when his world is either confirmed or shaken. The next morning, Emily leaves Maple Ridge before sunrise. We glimpse her at the small regional airport hours later, pack checked, ticket in hand. A motel clerk in Montana remembers her as friendly, organized, asking early about local shuttle times. Everything about her movements matches the itinerary on Michael's desk back in Oregon. Day 1 in the legal pad is filled and right on schedule. At 8:02 p.m., the phone rings. A brief message: she's reached the first staging point, weather is decent, trailhead tomorrow. Michael notes the time and location, then draws a neat check mark in the margin. Day 2, the message mentions getting onto the trail proper, good footing, fewer people than expected. Another check mark. Day 3, she reports making camp near a ridge, windy but beautiful. Day 4, the call comes later than usual, closer to 9 p.m., with a short explanation about slower miles and changing clouds. The delay tightens something in Michael's chest, but the box still gets its check mark. The system, he tells himself, is working. Day 5 is different. We sit in the Hart kitchen as the clock moves past 8. The phone doesn't ring. Michael stands, pours coffee he doesn't really want, and checks the line with a quick call to his own father across town. The phone works. The legal pad stays blank. At 9, he tells himself weather can slow everything down. Terrain can make signals patchy. At 10, he picks up the itinerary and reads it again, tracing the route with his finger. By midnight, the explanations start to sound thinner, even to him. Emily is careful. She builds extra time into her day specifically to keep this agreement. The longer the silence lasts, the less it feels like a delay and the more it feels like a break. Through the night, Michael and Linda move in and out of the kitchen in a loop of small, nervous tasks, rechecking numbers, dialing the motel, leaving messages with the outfitter. No one has heard from her since that Day 4 call. No one can say, for certain, where she slept last night. At first light, Michael stops treating this as a late check-in. He spreads the itinerary, the printed map, and the legal pad across the dining table, then makes a call of his own, to law enforcement in Montana. Calmly, he reads off dates, times, and locations, giving a stranger hundreds of miles away the only paper trail his daughter left behind. On the other end of the line, a dispatcher opens a fresh incident report. Within hours, that report will lead to search teams, helicopters, and a new file with the name Emily Hart typed neatly at the top. The morning after Emily Hart is reported missing, the quiet paperwork of a phone call turns into movement on the ground. In Montana, a search and rescue coordinator pins a fresh map to a plywood wall, traces her planned loop in red marker, and circles the last point anyone can place her for sure. Within hours, the first helicopter lifts off from a gravel airstrip, skimming over dark timber and broken ridgelines in the direction a 27-year-old travel writer was supposed to walk. From above, the backcountry looks endless. The crew flies grid patterns, back and forth over the valleys Emily highlighted for her parents before she left. They're trained to look for anything that doesn't belong, a patch of color, a reflective surface, the straight angles of a tent or tarp. On the ground, volunteer teams move along established trails and likely shortcuts, calling her name into wind that carries the sound away. They expect the usual signs they see when hikers get into trouble: a half-collapsed campsite, a dropped jacket, a set of footprints drifting off route. But day after day, there's nothing. No tent. No fire ring. No scattered gear. Just miles of rock, timber, and silence. Back in Maple Ridge, Michael and Linda live by the phone. Morning and evening, they get briefings from a search coordinator: weather windows, areas cleared, next steps. Michael listens with a pen in hand, unconsciously adding new notes to the same legal pad where he once wrote Day 1, all good. The check marks have stopped, now the margins fill with names of pilots, call times, and search sectors. Linda asks smaller questions: is it getting cold at night? Are there streams where she might have water? Using details to hold off the bigger fear hanging over the conversation. After the first week, the tone in those briefings begins to change. The ground teams have covered her planned loop multiple times. The helicopter crews have reflown narrow canyons and drainages in better light. There is still no trace of Emily or her bright red sleeping bag. A decision is made to transition from pure rescue mode into investigation. That's when Detective Sergeant Claire Monroe's name is added to the case file. Claire is not a search and rescue specialist. She is the person who comes in when a missing person report has outlived its initial hope. Her job is to answer a different set of questions. Was this a tragic accident in difficult terrain, or did something else intersect the victim's path? She starts where she always does, by building a timeline that doesn't rely on best guesses or wishful thinking. Her team pulls Emily's travel records: the regional flight into Montana, the motel near the small airport, the shuttle service that runs hikers toward the trailhead. A clerk remembers Emily checking out early, backpack already on, thanking him for marking a local bakery on her map. The shuttle driver notes that she got off exactly where she said she would, near a well-known starting point. Receipts, room keys, and mileage logs all line up with the itinerary Michael handed over on day 1. Next, Claire follows the money. Bank statements and credit card records show a predictable pattern: gear purchases before the trip, a motel bill, a couple of small food charges. There are no large withdrawals, no sudden cash advances, no tickets booked under another name. From a financial standpoint, Emily was behaving like someone planning to come home, not disappear. The third layer is digital, such as it exists in the mid-1990s. Claire and a state tech specialist sit in front of a beige desktop computer, loading copies of Emily's website and emails. Emily on the Road isn't a polished blog by modern standards. It's a handful of static pages and trip reports, updated slowly over a dial-up connection from Oregon. In her inbox and on a few hiking message boards, though, there's more activity. Most of the messages are ordinary, other hikers trading information about gear, weather, and trail difficulty. But one thread stands out to Claire. It's a back and forth with a generic screen name, no real photo, no biography, focused on Montana. The user talks about secret spots and lakes the guidebooks don't list, offering to share routes that only locals know. The tone isn't overtly threatening. If anything, it reads as overeager, like someone trying a little too hard to be helpful. There is nothing in the file to prove Emily ever met this person. There's also nothing to prove she didn't. Claire tries to push further. She contacts the old internet provider listed on the forum footer, asking if there are connection logs that might link that username to a real address. The answer, more than once, is that records from that era are gone. Whatever crumbs of data might have identified the user were never kept or have long since been erased. So the case sits in an uncomfortable place. All the tangible evidence, the travel bookings, the motel checkout, the shuttle driver's statement, the financial records, supports a simple story: a competent hiker went into remote country and didn't come back. But the absence of any physical trace, combined with that nameless online voice nudging her toward unmarked spots, refuses to let Claire file it away as just another wilderness accident. Weeks after the search began, the helicopters stand down. The volunteer teams go home. Officially, Emily Hart is listed as a missing hiker, presumed dead, with no body and no confirmed crime scene. Unofficially, her file remains dog-eared on Detective Monroe's desk, a reminder that somewhere between Maple Ridge and the Montana backcountry, something happened that no map, no bank record, and no search grid can fully explain. Years will pass before anyone stumbles on the first tangible sign that Emily's story did not end on the trail she planned. By the time the call comes in, Emily Hart's case has been sitting on a shelf for years. In official files, she's one of many names under missing hiker, presumed deceased in Montana backcountry. In Maple Ridge, Oregon, she's still the daughter whose picture sits on a mantle beside a burned-out candle. What no one expects, this far out from 1995, is that the first real physical clue won't come from a trail or a ridgeline at all, but from the bottom of a lake almost no one visits. It starts with two friends on a summer trip, paddling hard plastic kayaks into a high alpine basin. The lake they've chosen doesn't have a gift shop postcard or a paved road. To get there, they've dragged their boats up steep game trails and over deadfall, chasing solitude and clear water. That's exactly what they find: glassy, still surface, ringed by dark pines and rock. The kind of place where you expect to see fish and submerged logs, and nothing else. Drifting over the center of the lake, one of them looks down and freezes. On the bottom, maybe 30 feet below, something bright cuts through the muted greens and browns. At first, he assumes trash, a tent fly, a piece of tarp. But as they circle back and the angle of light shifts, the shape sharpens. It's long, cylindrical, and a red that doesn't belong in a glacial basin. It looks a lot like a sleeping bag, wrapped tight and held down by darker masses clustered at one end. They do what experienced backcountry users are trained to do. They don't try to pull it up themselves. They take photos, mark the GPS coordinates, and head back out the way they came. By nightfall, a park ranger is looking at their images on a computer screen, zooming in on the red cylinder and the neat line of what appear to be rocks or metal fixed along its base. Whatever this is, it wasn't dropped by accident. Within 48 hours, the lake that almost no one visits becomes the center of a carefully coordinated operation. A small incident command post goes up near the shore. A dive team is flown in with cold water suits, underwater cameras, and evidence bags. Before anyone gets in the water, they map out a plan, approach, document, recover. No shortcuts. Anything on the bottom might end up in court one day, or might at least need to stand up to later scrutiny. The footage from the first dive is unsettling in its simplicity. The water is so clear that the sleeping bag comes into view long before the diver reaches it. Red fabric, dark trim, gathered in on itself and lashed to a cluster of rocks and hardware. There's no sign of scattered debris, no tangle of branches that might explain how it got there. It's just sitting on clean stone, as if placed. The diver moves slowly, circling, taking stills and video from multiple angles before signaling to the surface. Only after that documentation do they begin the careful work of cutting the weight free and lifting the bundle up through the column of water. On shore, the scene looks more like a lab than a lakeside. Tarps are laid out. Cameras are ready. The red sleeping bag is eased onto the plastic, dripping lake water, and tagged. Investigators note the brand, the model, the way it's been cinched and tied. When they finally unroll it, what spills out is not a body, not a skeleton, but a mix of soaked fabric and metal, a battered camp mug, fragments of a compact navigation device, nylon straps, and a small waterproof pouch that has stayed stubbornly sealed. Inside that pouch are the items that change everything: a driver's license bearing the name Emily Hart and a photo that matches the woman from the missing posters, a few folded pages with handwriting that matches samples from her old letters, and scraps of what might be travel notes, blurred and smeared but recognizable enough to link them to the same careful planner from Maple Ridge. There are also trace biological samples on some of the fabric, but after years underwater, they're too degraded to answer the questions everyone most wants answered. Forensic labs can't say when, or even if, death occurred, or whether these items were packed by Emily herself or by someone else. When Detective Sergeant Claire Monroe gets the call, she pulls a file she hasn't opened in a long time. On one side of her desk, she lays out the original search maps from 1995, the red loop marking Emily's planned route. On the other, she pins a fresh topographical map of the Alpine basin where the lake sits. The distance between them isn't a minor detour. It's a completely different trip. Emily never mentioned this lake in her emails or her handwritten itinerary. There are no notes about it on her home maps. For the forensic team, the big task is timeline. The red fabric shows were consistent with long-term submersion, but not from the day Emily went missing. Corrosion on metal clips, growth on the rocks used as weights, and sediment patterns all suggest the bundle entered the lake sometime after 1995. Not last week, but not the week she vanished either. Someone handled that sleeping bag, those papers, and that gear at a later date, then took the trouble to sink them in a place almost no one sees. Whether that someone was Emily herself, still alive for a time after her last check-in, or another person altogether, that remains open. For Michael and Linda, the news lands in two parts. First comes the call that something belonging to their daughter has been found, then, slowly, the details about where and how. On one level, there's a strange relief in knowing that at least some part of Emily's story can be placed on a map again. On another, the discovery only widens the gap between what they thought they knew and what might be true. If her gear traveled that far, did Emily go with it? Did she change her mind about coming home? Was someone else guiding those choices? Officially, the classification on the books doesn't change much. Emily Hart remains a missing person, presumed deceased, with no confirmed body and no proven crime scene. But inside the investigation, the case shifts. What once read like a tragic accident in unforgiving country now looks more like a disappearance that continued off-trail, possibly by Emily's own hand, possibly not, long after the legal pad in Maple Ridge stopped getting its nightly check marks. From this point forward, every theory has to account for that lake, that sleeping bag, and the quiet, deliberate way her life was folded up and dropped out of sight. And as we move into the years that follow, the focus will turn less to where Emily might have fallen, and more to the question that haunts cold cases like this. Did she vanish because she had no choice, or because, at some crucial moment, she chose to step away? By the early 2000s, Emily Hart's case no longer dominates anyone's daily briefing. In official records, she's a line on a spreadsheet, a missing hiker from 1995 with personal effects later recovered from a remote Montana lake. In Maple Ridge, Oregon, she's still the daughter whose room hasn't changed much, maps on the walls, a faded printout of her Emily on the Road homepage curling at the edges, and a framed photo of her in that red sleeping bag, grinning at some forgotten trailhead. Time hasn't given Michael and Linda Hart answers. What it has given them is a choice about what to do with the space those answers should have filled. Michael chooses work. He retires from his job, then quietly starts something new in Emily's name, a small, grassroots safety project that begins with photocopied checklists and borrowed church basements. At first, it's just local scout troops and hiking clubs. He lays out maps and tells a simple story about a daughter who planned well, checked in every day, and still vanished. The group grows. A local outdoor store agrees to keep a stack of pamphlets near the register, solo trip safety basics, questions to ask before you trust a guide, check-in plans that actually get used. There's a grainy black and white photo of Emily on the back, but the material is practical, not dramatic, exactly the kind of thing she might have written herself. Her name becomes shorthand in the region for a certain kind of missing person case, not reckless, not obviously running, just gone. Hundreds of miles away, in an office lined with metal filing cabinets, Detective Sergeant Claire Monroe still keeps Emily's folder in the front half of a drawer. The discovery at the lake pulled the case briefly back into the light, but without a body, a cause of death, or a clear timeline, it never crossed the threshold into a solved crime. What Claire has instead are pieces, the old search maps from 1995, the topo sheet with the alpine lake circled in a different color, photos of the recovered sleeping bag and gear, and printouts from hiking forums where Emily once traded messages. As the decade turns and technology catches up, Claire goes back to those forums. What used to be a slow, manual search through pages of text becomes something more systematic. She and a younger analyst start looking for patterns, phrases that repeat, advice that sounds familiar, generic usernames that show up in multiple places. Over time, a shape emerges, posts from different accounts, on different boards, all offering some version of the same promise about remote country. Secret spots, lakes the guidebooks don't list, routes only locals know. A handful of other cold files from the region end up on Claire's desk, hikers who went off planned routes, trips that involved last-minute detours, lone travelers who mentioned a local tip before they stopped answering calls. Nothing ties those cases directly to Emily's, but the similarities bother her. They're like echoes, always around remote basins, always involving someone willing to leave the main trail for an experience they can't get anywhere else. An interagency meeting is called. Investigators from neighboring jurisdictions sit around a table with copies of forum posts highlighted in yellow. Could this be one person, using different handles over the years? Could it be a loose circle of people trading locations? Or is it just coincidence, the way stories and advice travel in small communities of hikers looking for the next undiscovered place? There's no IP data left from those early years, no preserved logs that could turn a username into a face. In the end, the review produces more questions than leads. Meanwhile, occasional tips still come in. Someone thinks they saw a woman who looks like Emily at a bus station 3 states away. A hiker sends in a blurry photograph from a distant campground where, in the background, a red sleeping bag is slung over someone's shoulder. A bank in another state flags a one-time inquiry on an old account that might match her number, but the trail dies before it can be confirmed. Each time, Claire logs the lead, makes the call she can, and then, reluctantly, writes no substantiated connection at the bottom of the page. In Maple Ridge, life doesn't stop. Neighbors get older. Kids Emily once babysat bring their own children to Michael's talks. Linda moves through the rituals of birthdays and holidays with a quiet steadiness, setting out the same 3 plates for Thanksgiving every year, even if one goes untouched. The photo of Emily at 27 never ages, even as everyone around her changes. Emily's case finds a second life not as an active hunt, but as a lesson. Her name shows up in training slides for new rangers and investigators, an example of how early online contact with strangers can reshape a trip, how clear plans can still be derailed by unseen variables, how a person can leave behind maps, messages, and loved ones and still end up categorized as missing, no body. In conference rooms and classrooms, the red sleeping bag appears on projector screens, not as a piece of horror, but as a caution about how little even good planning can guarantee. For Claire, the file becomes a kind of touchstone. When she talks about it, she doesn't pretend to know which theory is right. Maybe Emily met someone she trusted, someone who steered her off-route toward that lake and a future she didn't intend. Maybe she chose, at some point after her last check-in, to step fully away from the life she'd built, and the gear in the lake was staged to buy her time. Maybe the truth lies in a space between those possibilities, shaped as much by chance as by choice. What remains, after all the meetings and maps and forum printouts, is a thin folder in a steel drawer and a small nonprofit in a logging town in Oregon. One sits in the dark until someone pulls it out again. The other sets up folding chairs, hands out checklists, and tries to make sure the next hiker who disappears leaves a clearer trail behind. And somewhere in between, for the people who knew Emily and for those who only know her story, the question stays open: did she vanish because the wilderness demanded a price, or because at some point she decided not to come back? As we close this chapter, we leave you with that question, and with the image of a worn photograph on a mantle, a red sleeping bag frozen in time. If you were looking at this case from Claire's desk, what theory would make the most sense to you? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and tell us what you think really happened to Emily Hart.